Hello, and this video is a reboot, right? And I am going to cover an article in the jw.org website in the more topics section, keep on the watch, called Global Food Crisis Fueled by War and Climate Change. What does the Bible say? And I've covered this article before, but I decided to do a reboot of it because the situation with the world has deteriorated markedly as a result of the conflict that erupted in Palestine in October of 2023. So a lot of what this article says has to be contextualized by more recent events than when this article was written. So that's the reason I'm rebooting this article. Okay, I'm gonna reboot the. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reboot this review right here. I'm gonna make a new review of this article, and then I'm gonna put a link in the description to the old article, to the old video, which I am gonna leave unlisted. So I'm gonna update my review of this article. It's called "A Global Food Crisis Fueled by War and Climate Change. What does the Bible say?" And as usual, I'm gonna quote what the Jehovah's Witnesses have to say and then comment. So first, quote, "The war in Ukraine, coupled with the effects of climate change, continues to wreak havoc on global food supplies. This is especially the case in developing lands where many struggle to get enough food," end quote. So, so now to update this would be the war in Ukraine, the conflict in Palestine and the Middle East, which is increasing because now there is the United States and Britain bombed Yemen. The United States bombed Iranian targets in Syria and Iraq. There is an exchange of fire between Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israel. The Israeli attacks on the Palestinians in Gaza continue. The Houthi rebels continue to fire missiles at merchant shipping bound for Israel. Obviously, the situation is beginning to escalate, and so the war is becoming more and more acute. While the war in Ukraine continues to rage, the war in Ukraine is not a stalemate, but it continues to rage. And now these two wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, Palestine, are contextualized by climate change, which climate change, it doesn't necessarily mean global warming. What climate change people, the scientists that endorse, like, are trying to warn about climate change, say is that you will have extremes in temperatures. So you will have extremely hot summers and extremely cold winters, which is what happening now. The winter of 2023 to 2024 is a record cold. The summer of 2023 was record heat. So that is now we're having a situation where we have war in context of aggravating effects of climate change, right? And that is why there has been a collapse in agricultural production. I mean, certain countries have been taken out of the grain market. It is difficult to transport, grain and other foodstuffs over large distances because of the conflicts. So for all these reasons, the price of food has gone up, and that has affected people in developing countries who are very poor. So apparently, what I read during the inflation crisis of 2022, 71 million people were thrust into extreme poverty and food insecurity in the global south. So, and that was in 2022. Now it's much worse because the wars have become even more. The wars are beginning to metastasize into the precursor to World War III, maybe. So yeah, so the situation with war, climate change, and food scarcity is linked, and that is what Jehovah's Witnesses are pointing out in this article. So the Jehovah's Witnesses cite Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said on July 17, 2023, quote, "The production and availability of food is being disrupted by conflict, climate change, energy prices, and more." right? So the UN is aware of this. So conflict, climate change, energy prices. Energy prices, why? Because Russia was taken out of the oil market. So the price of oil went up, which means that the price of gasoline goes up, price of transportation of grain and other scarce food items over long distances increases. These costs are passed on to the consumer. Consumers in poor countries, underdeveloped countries, global south, the 71 million who were thrust into food insecurity and extreme poverty, their situation is aggravated, right? So, a quote, experts predict that Russia's withdrawal from the grain export agreement will aggravate the global food security crisis and lead to higher food inflation in low-income countries, especially in North Africa and the Middle East. And that is from atalaya.com, July 23, 2023. Especially in North Africa and the Middle East, precisely the area that after October 7, 2023 erupted in violence, right? So the fact that the war in Gaza is starting to spread out of Palestine into Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, and Yemen, then that creates even more problems for poor people in those areas, because it aggravates the situation of food insecurity. War aggravates the situation of food insecurity. So, and it is precisely North Africa and the Middle East that are being affected here. So yeah. Anyways, the Jehovah's Witnesses go on, and they have here this is the exegesis of it. So, the Bible foretold food crisis, and this is the masthead. The Bible foretold food crisis, and it says here, quote, Jesus prophesied, quote, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be food shortages. And they cite Matthew 24:7 to a scriptural basis for this statement. And I'm going to look into the Jehovah's Witness version of the Bible, and I'm going to look at, let's see, last time I used Bible Gateway. I'm going to use Bible Hub this time. Okay, Bible Hub. And I mean, I don't make, to me, Bible Hub and Bible Gateway are the same. I use both. But, and in Bible Hub, they have an interlinear Bible, which is very useful. But yeah, let's see. And this was Matthew, let's see, Matthew 24:7. So, Matthew 24:7. And let's see, Matthew. I do that all the time. I misspell Matthew with one T instead of two T's in English. Because in Spanish it's Mateo with one T, and in English it's Matthew with two T's, and I always forget that, and I always misspell it. Anyways, forget that. Forget about it. Let's see. I'm gonna use it. Let's see. I'm gonna quote from the. I'm gonna quote. Let's do that. Let's look at 5 different versions of the Bible. Okay. Let's see. The Jehovah's Witness Bible, which is the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, and I assume this is the 2013 edition, otherwise known as the Silver Sword, is the one I'm going to quote here. And in the Jehovah's Witness website, you can access it for free, and you can download it too as an EPUB. And now they also have the 1984 edition. So, but the official one now is the 2013 edition, the Silver Sword. But it says here in the Jehovah's Witness New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, quote, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be food shortages and earthquakes in one place after another, end quote. And in 8, it doesn't cite 8 in the article, but 8 is important too. All these things are a beginning of pangs of distress. So all these things that are happening right now, if we are to believe this exegesis, everything that is happening now, climate change, the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, the food shortages, food insecurity, all these problems are not really the end, but only signs that the end is very near, right? All these things are a beginning of pangs of distress. And in the Jehovah's Witness New World Translation, and I like this, in the study edition of the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, in the study edition, it will have like a commentary and notes. So I'm going to read what is the exegesis of Matthew 24:7 that Jehovah's Witnesses have. This is interesting. And it says, nation, The Greek word ethnos has a broad meaning that and can refer to people living within certain political or geographical boundaries, such as a country, but can also refer to an ethnic group, right? So nation can either be established country like Norway, or it can be a group, an ethnic group that is stateless like Kurds or Palestinians. And rise, or quote, be stirred up, be roused up, end quote. Here the Greek word conveys the idea, quote, to move against in hostility, end quote, and could also be rendered, quote, rise up in arms, end quote, or quote, go to war, end quote. So that was the exegesis from the Jehovah's Witnesses. And the exegesis you can find in the study edition of the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures. They have two editions. They have the silver sword that people use during field service and for their own private use, and then they have the study edition, which is the one that you use for theological and exegetical, purposes. And in Jehovah's Witnesses, of course, you're not allowed to look at the Bible on your own. You have to look at the Bible. The Watchtower magazine interprets the Bible for you. So yeah, so you gotta follow the Watchtower interpret. The Watchtower will point you as to where your mind needs to go, right? You're not allowed to interpret the Bible for yourself. So and that's one of the reasons I left Jehovah's Witnesses. But let's see. Matthew 24:7, and I'm looking at Bible Hub. And like I said before, I use Bible Hub and Bible Gateway interchangeably. I like in Bible Hub they have an online interlinear Bible. So I believe from Greek and Greek to English and etc. But it says here the New International. Okay, the New International Version in Matthew 24:7, quote, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places, end quote. The New Living Translation says, quote, nation will go to war against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world, end quote. English Standard Version, quote, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. So basically, okay, so all the Bible versions agree on this, right? So I mean, and with the Bible, the different Bible versions is it's a case by case basis situation with the verses. Sometimes the verses agree, like in this case, but sometimes the semantics are slightly different. So so because the semantics are different, it could give rise to different interpretations and exegetical implications. The exegesis could evolve in different ways depending on the semantics you find for a particular verse in a particular version. And also there's the problem of the codexes. I mean, there is several codexes. So there are several root codexes. In general, in Western countries is the Athanasian list of New Testament canon. But in the Ethiopian Church, they have a different list of books. And in the Lingua Vulgata of the Catholic Church, they consider the Apocrypha to be deuterocanonical. In the 1611 King James, they had the Apocrypha as deuterocanonical, but in the Revised Edition in the Victoria era, British Empire, they took it out. So yeah, so there is a dispute between Catholics and Protestants as to whether the Old Testament Apocrypha could be considered deuterocanonical or non-canonical. Catholics consider the Apocrypha of the Old Testament, I believe it's in the Lingua Vulgata, like the Book of Tobit, etc., Bel and the Dragon, they consider that to be deuterocanonical. Protestants do not recognize the canonicity of those books and ignore them in their Bibles. So the Bible is different things to different people. So that's the reason I prefer the Book of Mormon and the Quran, because with the Book of Mormon and the Holy Quran, you only have one book. Okay, there is only one translation of the Book of Mormon. There is only one translation of the Holy Quran, and that's it. That's why I consider the Book of Mormon and the Holy Quran more reliable than the Bible, because and the Bible versions that I look at is New International Version and the 1611 King James. But anyways, right. So that said about Matthew 24:7. So let's see. So the Bible foretold food crisis, and we already looked at Matthew 24:7. The article continues, quote, the Bible book of Revelation describes four symbolic horsemen. One of those horsemen represents warfare. He is followed by another who represents famine, a time when food would be rationed and sold at exorbitant prices. Quote, I saw a black horse, and its rider had a balance scale in one hand. I heard what sounded like a voice. It said, quote, a quart of wheat will cost you a whole day's wages. 3 quarts of barley will cost you a day's wages too. So, and in a previous video where I discussed, the Jehovah's Witnesses versus the Apocalypse of Thomas, in the Apocalypse of Thomas, it says that there will be an inflation before the end. Let me just quote what the Apocalypse of Thomas has to say, okay, really quickly. This is what the Apocalypse of Thomas says. Quote, thereafter there shall be plenty of corn and wine and oil, but great inflation, so that gold and silver shall be given for corn, and there shall be great dearth. Great death. See? So at first there will be plenty of corn and wine and oil, but as a result of a great inflation, large amounts of gold and silver will be required for corn, and because of that, there will be great debt among those who cannot afford to pay for the corn, wine, and oil. That is what the Apocalypse of Thomas says, right? So it is very interesting that the book of Revelation and the Apocalypse of Thomas agree here. So a quart of wheat will cost you a whole day's wages. 3 quarts of barley will cost you a day's wages too, right? And they take that from Revelation 6:5-6, and that they're quoting here the contemporary English version. Okay, so the Apocalypse of Thomas, New Testament Apocrypha, and Book of Revelation, canonical Apocrypha, agree that prior to the end there will be a great inflation. Okay, and the inflation problem is starting in 2022. Now the government claims in the European Union and the United States, Australia, all the major Western countries, Canada, United States, European Union, Australia, they claim that inflation is under control. This is the mantra. And all the central bankers in Australia, Europe, Canada, United States are chanting this in unison. It's like a mantra. Inflation is under control. Inflation is under control. The problem is, though, that what they have done is that they have fixed the methodology to calculate inflation so that the result is lower. And it looks like inflation is being controlled, but it's not really the case. Because, for example, I don't know about another country, for example, in Scandinavia, right? Food prices have not come down from 2022. Electricity prices have not come down for 2022. And the cost of rent has increased compared to 2022. The cost of public transportation has increased. And, the price of gas is not exactly the same as it was before the inflation either. So, you see what I'm saying? So, in the reality in the ground is one of people are experiencing inflation, even though the government and the central bankers are saying that inflation is under control. Why? Because they cooked the methodology. They fixed the methodology to come up with numbers that are false. So the central bankers and the government are projecting a false picture of the economy. Probably because they don't want to create a panic. Probably. But yeah. Another thing that is very important, and I cited this in the video where I talk about, whether Jehovah's Witnesses versus Apocalypse of Thomas. Yeah, the Bible book of Revelation describes 4 symbolic horsemen. One of those horsemen represents warfare. We have warfare right now in Ukraine and the Middle East, as I already explained. He is followed by another who represents famine, right? And again, in 2022, well, I guess in our case, the famine rode in before the war because, well, the war in Ukraine started in March of 2022, and then the inflation problem, started to become more problematic, and then that's when you had 71 million people in the global south were thrust into food insecurity. Okay, so yeah, first came the war in Ukraine, then came the famine, and then a time when food would be rationed and sold at exorbitant prices. Yeah, that has happened in many global south countries. So yeah, So yeah, so the book of Revelation and current events are aligned here. So I guess you could say that I can say here we have a newspaper exegesis that works. Not only do current events align with book of Revelation, that prima facie it looks that way, but what it says in the book of Revelation is corroborated by the apocryphal Apocalypse of Thomas. That there will be an inflation in the cost of wine, oil, and corn, and that inflation will lead to death, which is famine. So, yeah, you can take that to mean whatever you want it to mean, right? I'm not advocating anything here. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying that the end is near or anything. I'm just saying that it looks prima facie. Prima facie, it looks like in this case, newspaper exegesis is working. Okay. Quote: These Bible prophecies about food crisis are being fulfilled now in the time that the Bible calls the last days, and that they cite 2 Timothy 3:1 as a scriptural basis for this statement. To learn more about the last days and the right of the fourth horseman of Revelation, watch the video "The World Has Changed Since 1914" and read the article "The Fourth Horsemen, Who Are They?" And I'll put links in the description to this. It's beyond the scope of this video to review that, but you can look it up yourself. And the article concludes how the Bible can help. And it says here, quote, "The Bible contains practical advice that can help us cope with challenging circumstances, including rising food prices and even food shortages." Yeah, and it says, see some examples in the article, how to live on less, right? Yeah, and Jehovah's Witnesses, like the LDS Mormons, they believe in being prepared for the end. So each, they have like a little backpack with emergency supplies in case they have to like run out, or in case they have to run. In case they have to run because, escape the worst of the collapse of civilization. So in order to survive Armageddon, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormon and LDS Mormons will keep like a backpack with emergency supplies. And that's not a bad thing. I have one of those. I still have mine. I don't really have a reason to throw it away. Just in case, you never know. And quote, finally, quote, "The Bible also gives us hope that things will get better. It promises a time when, quote, there will be an abundance of grain on the earth," end quote, "and everyone will have plenty to eat." And they cite Psalm 72:16 as a scriptural basis for this statement. There will be an abundance of grain on the earth and everyone will have plenty to eat. That is, of course, in the Mormon version of restorationism. LDS Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses are outcomes of restorationism, right? Because both Joseph Smith, who founded the Mormon movement, and Charles S. Russell, who founded the Bible student movement, from which Jehovah's Witnesses split in 1931, both were exponents of restorationism coming out of the second and third awakenings in the United States. So, in the LDS Mormon narrative, the situation described here of there will be an abundance of grain on the earth and everybody will have plenty to eat is Psalm 72:16. Is called Zion, right? So Zion is this post-apocalyptic utopia where there will be justice and peace and everybody will have plenty to eat, right? So Jehovah's Witnesses call it the new system. What Jehovah's Witnesses call it the new system, and LDS Mormons call it Zion, but it's the same thing. Anyways, that concludes this review, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.